My name is Ashley, and this is Let's Talk Dispatch.
I do. You're gonna do it really well.
And I believe the world needs more dispatchers.
Around in the mud, blood, and
plus
beer.
years that I'm not working 4th of July. 4th of July.
Saying community policing, right? What about community dispatching?
So on this show, with the help of my guests, we will educate, empower, and support the heroes behind the headset. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode here on Let's Talk Dispatch. On my social medias and things of that nature, I'm starting to get a lot of really good traction. My reels and things are getting a lot of views, reaching people outside of the dispatch world. And the funny thing about being out here on the social medias and things like that is that you are, like my guest, you're being vulnerable with strangers. And you'd be surprised how often people provide their opinions and their feedback in regards to dispatchers being first responders and things of that nature. And it's not always a positive reaction. There's still a lot of folks out there who don't believe that dispatchers are first responders. And really what it all circles back to is just a lack of knowledge, a lack of awareness. And really the reason that we're doing this podcast, creating these platforms on social media, creating this content that's relatable to people who are consuming it, the everyday citizen. That's why we're doing it. And one thing I won't do on any of my platforms is debate if a first responder is a dispatcher, if a dispatcher is a first responder. But what we're here for is to provide this information, to provide this context to the everyday citizen. And the more they see content like we have at the Raspy Dispatcher, like we have on all these other platforms that are pushing this idea, this truth that dispatchers are first responders, the more consumable it'll be, the more folks who aren't dealing with this type of job, this type of environment on a daily basis will easily look and go, oh yeah, that's true, and keep it moving. So for everyone who's following me on these social media platforms, thank you so much. I've reached over 2,000 followers on my Instagram page, over 2,000 followers on my Facebook, and we're reaching so many more people, which is amazing. Even though we got a few trolls out there, it's all good because all we're doing is spreading truth and positivity. So with all that being said, we're going to bring my next guest on Let's Talk Dispatch on today. They've been working with their department since 2008. They've dispatched police and fire services, and they're their department's training coordinator as well as a supervisor. Oh, and they're also their union president, which we're definitely going to dive into because a lot of folks do ask about dispatchers being unionized and things of that nature when they're considering this job. She has a ton of experience, and we get to hear all about it today. My guest, Rochelle. Hi, Rochelle.
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Oh my gosh. I am well. I am well. A little tired. I have a little Starbucks here. Not a paid ad, but we're out here trying. Oh yes. Man. Well,
dispatchers cannot live without their coffee.
That's the truth. Caffeine and chaos, we're thriving on it.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to jump on the show today. I believe you hopped on and grabbed a guest slot when I posted on my socials that I was looking for folks to come onto the show. And yes. I really appreciate you being willing to jump on here.
Yes, I'm super excited. I cannot wait. I have so much stuff to tell everybody.
You hear that, everybody? Listen up. We're about to dive deep. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into public safety, all that good stuff.
So I started in 2008. It's a funny story. So I moved into a house, and my landlord at the time, I didn't know when I moved in, you went through like your questions and stuff that they ask you when you're applying to rent a house and things like that. And he was asking me about my job. Well, I worked in a different city that was about an hour away, and I had to commute about an hour every day. Mm-hmm. And so I was, talking to him about the weather and driving and, how it sometimes takes a long time. And he's like, well, the type of job that you do, if you wanted to, you could apply at where I work. And I was like, okay, tell me more. And so he started talking about it and everything, and he made it sound so amazing. He's like, well, you can come and, answer some 911. Oh, sorry, I had a problem. He's like, you can come and answer some 911 calls for me. And he's like, it's super, super easy, and it's not that big of a deal. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And he's like, I'm a detective. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I wanted to know, a little bit more about it. And so he kind of sent me an email with the job application, and I filled out the application. And it was a super long process. It took about 2.5 months before they even contacted me, because they had to do all kinds of background checks and make sure, you were fit for the job and everything. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I worked in like a call center before, so it was like a customer service type background. And I started there, and like my first week, I was like, oh my God, this is completely different from what I did before. And I mean, the rest was just kind of history. After that, it was like I was sucked in.
I love that the landlord was handing out like housing and job
Yes.
applications. They're just like, look, we're gonna kill two birds with one stone here.
Yeah. He's like, we need people. You would be awesome at it. I was like, you don't really know me, but okay, that's fine.
That's so funny. It's always so interesting, like how people like find this line of work, right? Like it's
Oh
just,
my God.
if you never would have rented this place, would you ever have
Yes.
had this interaction or this knowledge to look into this
Right.
career? And you know what I mean? Like it's just always so
Yes.
interesting how one thing can change our whole trajectory.
And it's like just a right place, right time thing for sure, because I've always been like interested in like true crime and stuff like that. And when I was younger, I wanted to um, be into law enforcement. So it was like just a passion right from the get go. And you never really know what people do as a 911 dispatcher until you're in there and you actually see everything going
Mhm.
on, and you see, somebody taking their first serious call, things like that. And it's like such a well-oiled machine, and it just draws you in. You're like, I want to do that. That is something I want to be, that person someday.
Mhm.
And it's just so crazy because you see all of that stuff and you're like, oh my God, will I ever be able to do that? Am I going to be able to be that calm? Am I going to, and it's so amazing.
Yeah, no, it really is. I remember when I did my my sit along, and I sat with someone who ended up being my coworker eventually, but I was watching them like just field these calls and like remain so steady, so calm,
Yes.
so professional, so empathetic, for
Yes.
my 2 hour sit along. And I remember leaving and getting in my car, and like after watching this person perform in this manner, thinking like, wow, like I want to be that. I want to do that job like them. So because if they made me feel that way, just sitting there watching them, I could only imagine how their callers felt, with
Right.
them as a dispatcher, like, because they made me feel great, and I was just watching them do the job, let alone be the person in the crisis.
Oh my
It's,
God. Yes.
yeah, it's just so impactful how much a dispatcher can make or break a call.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Mhm.
We
So
talk
what
about
went
it all
so
the
far?
time.
Yeah.
We talk about how, if you're answering a phone, I'm pretty old school. I've been there for a very long time. So when I started, dispatchers were not very well recognized. It was a situation where you're kind of the heard but not seen, but not really heard because the officer, is the face type of thing. So
Mhm.
um, it was more of just do the right thing, make these choices, make the officer look good. You want to make the officer look good. And so
Mhm.
I always try to train my people that if somebody's calling in and they're irate, they're freaking out, they're yelling, they're screaming, if I can get them from a 10 to like at least a good 5 before the officers
Mhm.
get there, it's safe for everybody. They're
Yeah.
not going to be causing a scene, getting in trouble. They're not going to be amped up. They're not going to be more likely to want to go crazy with the officers or whatever. So it's safe for the officers and it's safe for them. It's so
Yeah.
important to be that empathetic person.
Yeah. I mean, life-saving measures start the moment we pick up that 911 call. And that is
Yes.
something that folks have a hard time understanding in regards
Mhm.
to the debate about dispatchers being first responders and whatnot, is if I am not successful at my job, getting the location, getting the description, providing CPR, things of that nature, depending on what kind of dispatch you are,
Mhm.
it could change the call completely. If I get a wrong location and we don't go to the right location, that could mean lives, right? Like if I'm not
Yes.
able to provide CPR or get that person to start doing CPR before my units arrive, that could be the difference between a survival and none, right? Like,
Yes.
and it just goes to show the teamwork that happens in emergency services that everyone is not aware of, and they really should be.
Oh, yes, for sure. It definitely starts with us. I mean, we can make or break a situation very easily. I feel like it's super important.
No, it is. And I mean, if you think about just the responding units, right? Like if I hype my caller up, like you said, if I take him from a 10 to a 20, then my officers there dealing with someone essentially I pissed off more, like that's not helping my officer. But like you said, if I can get them to come down to realize like we're here, we're helping, we're doing everything we can, my officer is going to have a better interaction with that citizen. And that citizen hopefully never has to call 911 again, right? And they can look
Right.
back at that one time they called 911 and know they had a good interaction with the dispatcher, a good interaction with law enforcement, fired personnel, like whoever, and know it was a positive experience. Because what do we do when we have a story to tell? We either tell it in a positive light or we tell it in a negative one. And I
Right.
want every time someone talks about me in my department and my interactions with them to be positive. Like I had this
Right.
terrible day, but so and so made it better.
Right. Yeah, because I think sometimes it's hard, especially if you're in dispatch for the long run, and we deal with everybody's terrible situation. So we're getting all bad, and sometimes, every once in a while we get mixed in that little good, but for the most part we're getting every single person's worst call. And so it's kind of hard sometimes to get your mind switched out of, hey, there's people that do have good days. We can make a positive outcome in things. It's so hard to get that wrapped around your mind.
Mm-hmm. It's so true.
So I think
Well, what?
people sometimes just go ahead, sorry.
No, 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 no. Please finish.
I was just gonna say, so like if I'm dealing with, one call after another call after another call, and everybody's so upset and so mad, it's hard sometimes not to get that jaded personality where you're like, okay, everybody's just angry, everybody's mad, the whole world's angry, and then for me it helps because you'll get those calls, and then you'll get that one call where you're talking to somebody and they'll say thank you, or you made a difference to me, or I really appreciate you, or you have some type of positive outcome. And it's so beneficial, I think, to you as a person, because it kind of gives you that satisfaction of, okay, so I can actually be a good person sometimes too.
Yeah. And it is so true. I mean, like, I called out sick a couple weeks ago, and I remember I just wasn't feeling great. And when a dispatcher calls out, like it's anxiety to the max, you gotta like hype yourself up. You could be in the hospital post surgery and still try to go shift.
Oh my
But
God, yeah.
I remember like just feeling like sick and just going, I don't want to yell at today. Like I don't. In addition to not feeling great, I was like, I'm not looking to get yelled at today. I don't want to get yelled at by these citizens who are having a bad
Right.
day. Like I'm human too. And I think that's okay to acknowledge like some days, I don't want to deal with it, especially if I'm not feeling my 100%, so we're humans answering these
Yes.
phones as well. We understand you're not having the
Mhm.
best day, but we're trying to work with each other, to make it a successful call.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
what was
You
it
got to
like?
have that mental capacity.
Yeah, no, straight up. What was it like for you in the beginning? You get this new house, and then you show up to
Right.
your new job. Like, what was that process
Yeah.
like for you in the beginning?
So we didn't do sit-ins until you actually got hired. So
Mm,
when I got hired, I was 2 months pregnant with my youngest son.
mm,
And I already had, like emotions going all over with my hormones and everything. So I go in there, and the first interview that I did, I come in and it's like a panel of like 7 people. And so you're already nervous because you don't really know what to expect. And I go in and I sit down and I'm like surrounded by 7 people who are like super straight faced, and they're like, and asking me questions, and I'm like so nervous. So I'm answering everything, and I felt super intimidated because, usually if you don't have any interaction with law enforcement, you're going to the police station for not a good thing, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going in there and I'm like, okay, I'm trying not to be nervous. I'm trying not to be like sweaty. Don't look at me. I'm trying to answer these questions professional and stuff. So I had that interaction. And then the next time that they offered me the job, I came in, and that was my first like interaction with them. And so I come in and everybody has their, assigned place, and there were people that had been there for 20 years. There were people that had been there for a year. It was, mixed experience. And you have the people that, have been there for a while that nobody really talks to because they don't want to make them upset or, whatever. And so I kind of saw that initial everybody fits in their certain place type of thing. And I was like, oh my God, where am I going to fit into this? Like, I'm an outgoing person. I like to talk and make friends. I like to, see what everybody's doing. I'm the one that's like up hopping around talking to everybody, and everybody's just sitting there and they're like super professional, I'm like, okay, am I going to be able to do this? I have to turn like a serious face on. Okay, now I have to talk to these people. And so when I was in there doing my first like actual monitoring and stuff, one of the girls that was sitting with me, I had like a headset strapped in listening to them, and she was taking a call, and it ended up being a really serious situation. Like, the guy had barricaded himself in the house and wasn't going to come out, and we had to call out SWAT and all of that. And she was so super calm. Well, he wanted to call in and talk to her instead of the actual negotiator because she had talked to him to begin with. So she had built that rapport, and she was talking to him the whole time. And it was like a good 2-hour long ordeal. They got him out of the house safe. Everything was good. And then I looked at her, I'm like, how do you talk to these people like that? Like, how do you sit there and know that this person is heavily armed? He's wanting to, kill officers. He's wanting to kill people. He's talking to you, and you're talking to him like you're his best friend. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And she's like, you'll get there. You'll be there one day. I have no doubt you'll be there. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah.
It was so like intimidating.
No, it is so true. And I mean, to a point, like, also, I've had these situations as well where, subject's barricaded, you start the call, you transfer it to a detective or a CNT trained officer and, whatnot. And it does open the question of like, why aren't dispatchers trained with that precise? Because I mean, that's really a lot of what we're doing before we're negotiating. We're bringing people down to a level, we do get stuck on the phone with these people sometimes. And sometimes, like the story you told, they don't want to talk to the cop, they want to talk to the person that they've been talking to until folks arrived. And so I think having dispatchers trained in that type of negotiation style is something we should be doing more often than less.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it would be really beneficial because we've already built that rapport. We've already talked to them. You're on the phone with them until somebody can get there, or a negotiator. I mean, there's been times I've been on the phone with people for hours. You're talking to them and you're getting to know everything about them. Like, you have that rapport and that respect. So then to throw somebody else on the phone, sometimes it's hit or miss.
Yeah, no, really. And I mean, in regards to like, I think out here, like, I'm in a bigger metropolitan city area. Our response time it's pretty quick in the city that I work in currently. But that's not the case in all the places that we're answering 911. Some places we have really rural areas when there's like one sheriff, their cover unit's like 45 minutes away, like there's situations like that if you're not living in it, you're not dispatching in it, you're not experiencing it, you don't think that's that's reality. You know, I think most citizens believe we teleport, and we don't. We would prefer that they did as well. We don't want to sit on the
Right.
phone, you know, for that long either. But
Right.
sometimes we do get stuck on these calls because, you know, we don't have an officer available, or they're coming from a distance, or, you know, they're going from one hot call to another. And it is
Right.
our job to stay on that phone when the situation calls for it until cover arrives. And while you're doing that, you're going through someone's ups and downs, and you're managing that, because again, how you handle that call is going to directly impact that officer, that unit, that firefighters interaction with that individual when they get on scene.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I think that's super important. I know I've taught some classes for some very rural areas where they don't have anybody on duty after a certain amount of time. I know like our local highway patrol, they don't have anybody after like a certain time at night. They have to actually call somebody and wake them up and wait for them to get up, get ready, get dressed, and then come to work. So there's a long response time for that.
Yeah, and it's crazy, right? I mean, it's just, and the thing is, like, I think when people hear that, they're like, "How is this even, you know, a thing?" Like, you know, but the realities of how people operate in different areas, it's just a different reality, right? Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine living where I live, hearing that you have to call and wake someone up. Like, it's just
Yeah.
like that doesn't make sense to me. But if I was living in a rural area, you know, that would make sense. And I probably know the person you're waking up, you know, like
Right.
those things
Yeah.
translate better. And departments are going to create policy and create shifts and things like that that serve their community best, because 9 times out of
Yeah.
10, nothing's happening, right? Like, you know, nothing's going on.
Right.
So there's no need for that person to be up, but they need to be available if something does happen. And that's what we're here for
Right.
when the thing happens, right?
Yeah, I'm just lucky to be a part of an agency that we have somebody on full time all the time. I mean, we have several officers, but we do like I do the police, the city police, we do the county sheriff, and then we do the fire for the city and the county. But our county fire is the same way. They're all volunteer people. So if there's a good fire out in the county, we have to call them, you know, and get them waking up from home. So they're going to have to get up, go home, but get ready at home, then go to the fire station, get the stuff that they need, and then go to the fire. And sometimes, like you said, it is a good 45 minutes out. So if they get a good fire, there's a good chance that there's a lot of stuff that's burnt by the time they get there, you know?
Yeah. It really is. It's wild. It's wild. It always amazes me how different this job looks every place. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
every place, it just looks so different. And folks are just finding so many creative ways to do a job when it looks different, you know? I couldn't imagine, like, when I get on and I have no units available, stresses me out. I'm like, something's gonna happen. I need someone to be ready to go, you know. And then we have folks who are dispatching with one person in the center, you know, no units available because everyone's asleep, and then something pops off, and you're just like, now I gotta go wake this person up, and it just looks so different. And you know, kudos for folks who are working in one person dispatch centers in these smaller rural communities. I mean, I can imagine it. It has to be a different level of tough, I would say.
Yeah. It gives me like I said, I've taught classes for people that work in a one person center, and they're like, you know, we work in a one person center. We're also like our jailer. We cook meals for the inmates. We book in people. We take people to court. I'm like, how do you do that? You know, like that's just doesn't process in my mind. Like they say, you know, if they're on a 911 call and they put dinner in the oven, sometimes it can get burnt because they're too, you know, they're busy on the phone dealing with whatever the situation may be. And I'm like, that just doesn't process in my mind, because I work for a center that there is not one time that I'm not busy and not on the phone. There's no way I could be available to cook meals.
Barely
you know?
feed myself. I can't feed the inmate.
Yeah, but I mean, it works. It works. I don't know.
Yeah, no. The idea of, being a jailer as a dispatcher is wild to me, but
Yes.
cooking, like if that was, I wouldn't be hired. They were like, look, like sometimes you got to cook for the inmates. I'm like, if I feed them, we're going to open ourselves up for a lawsuit because they're going to eat my food and they're going to be like, this is inhumane because
Yes.
that's why my partner does all the cooking because it's just,
Yeah.
it wouldn't
There's
be
no
good if I
way.
started feeding folks.
They would be eating some burnt fish sticks or something. Like
Right?
there's no way.
Nuggies? Some dino nuggets? Like, what are we doing here? What's happening? Oh, that's
Yes.
wild. That's so funny. Well, one of the things that, you mentioned when talking about coming on the show was tactical dispatch,
Yes.
active shooter situations. These are for folks who are not in this line of work. These are things that we see and hear about, unfortunately, so much
Yeah.
more often than, I remember when I was a kid, Columbine happened, and now it's just like the list is endless. So these type of calls that require tactical dispatch that are active shooter scenarios are calls that are a dispatcher's worst nightmare. We never
Yes.
want to have to take this type of call. It's a life-changing type of call. But we're also paid to be prepared to take this kind of call. So for folks who are listening, folks who are doing this job, folks who are just out there in the everyday world, what are some things to consider with these type of situations as a dispatcher?
So for me, tactical dispatching, active shooter type of stuff, I know it sounds really kooky, but we all have some weird sense of humor. So it's a passion of mine. I love getting to know, the ins and the outs and what makes people do that. So it's a passion that I've had. My grandpa, that he was a sheriff deputy in Colorado. And when I was younger, he worked the Columbine incident.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah, awesome.
the summer after it happened, I think I was like 13, 14 years old, but I got to go down there and actually go in Columbine and go around. And he showed me, the incident, the way that things happened, the windows that you see, the kids and everybody jumping out. And it kind of impacted me a lot in the way that, you think about things and things like that. So that's something that I've always had super dear to my heart. I have a lot of family that lives in Colorado, and I had a couple of family members that just barely missed the movie theater shooting, the Batman shooting. They were supposed to go to that premiere and they didn't end up going. One of my cousins got kind of stood up. She was supposed to go on a blind date and she got stood up, which was like the luckiest thing to happen to her because she didn't end up going to that shooting. So she would have potentially been a victim, So it's just something that I've been super passionate about and wanting to learn more about. I think the big thing is, like you said, it is a dispatcher's worst nightmare. And for those small centers that have one or two dispatchers working, I just cannot comprehend in my mind how you would be able to do that because you're getting so many calls. The big thing to think about is the calls that you would get like on an average wreck, you multiply that by like 100, you're getting phones ringing off the hook. And then with our newer technology that we have, the next gen 911 stuff, you're going to be getting the text dispatching, you're going to be getting the text to 911, you're going to be getting emails. I mean, everybody's going to be calling because the majority of the times these incidents are at, highly populated areas. So my biggest thing to think about is, how long should you stay on the phone? How long am I going to stay on the phone with each person? Because everybody is going to be wanting to give their side of the story and have something important to say, but you're not going to be able to stay on the phone with every single person that long, right? Like, you're just going to have to get the information that you can. So what I try to teach people, what I tell people is, you want to be on the phone with the person who has the most accurate and up-to-date information. Like, can you see the shooter? Do you know where the shooter's at? And that's the person that I want to stay on the phone with. If they can't see that person anymore, and they're going to have to be in a safe place, that's a big thing too. Make sure they're in a safe place to give you that information. But if they can't see him anymore, I want to know where you're at, but in that moment, you're not as useful to me. So I have to get off the phone and answer the phone for the next person to see if they have any more credible information. And I
Mm,
think in incidents like that, it's so hard because these are all victims and you're wanting to be there for them, but you
yeah.
have to know you have to get, the next updated information because that's what your officers are going to need.
Yeah, and another thing that happens a lot of time with like these active shooter situations, especially when it's like at a high school or, a school, you get all the parents calling.
Yes.
So if you're listening, calling 911, asking what's going on, it floods our lines. Like
Yes.
we are trying to find the person who's calling in, like Rochelle said, with the accurate side of the person, most accurate information. And if I'm answering 911 from frantic family members, which rightfully so, you're preventing me from doing my job. You're preventing me from helping
Right.
your family. And that's just the harsh reality. And it's kind of hard to tell people that. And they want someone to comfort them, someone to tell them that it's okay and they're okay, their loved one's okay. But I don't know. I don't know where
Right.
your loved one is at this moment. I can't tell you anything other than we're working it, right? So
Right.
calling and flooding the lines it's just preventing us from doing the job because now I got to work to get you off the phone just to answer the next call, which is trying to find that person who's looking at them, seeing it just happened,
Right.
or so we don't want to flood the lines either.
Yeah, and I think the next thing is, like I said, you're going to be hard. It's going to be hard for you to stay on the phone and hard to get off the phone because these are people that have been shot, they're victims, and we're
Mhm.
here to it's our first instinct to want to help people, to want to comfort them. But in that instance, you can't really stay on the phone with them either. I mean, there's certain, protocols that you have to have and
Of
things
course.
like that, but just
Mhm.
making sure that those people recognize that when the officers get there, they're more than likely not coming straight to them. They're going to go get the bad guy and then coming to them. I mean, we've
Mhm.
had situations where the officers will have to step over the injured, but they're going there to eliminate the problem, make sure that, it's the best possible outcome, and then they're going to come and get those that are injured.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something that has developed and progressed, right? As we've had
Mhm.
more active shooter situations, the way officers are taught to respond has
Yes.
been critiqued, has been improved, has been, um, made to be so different than, let's say, Columbine years ago. Like the
Mhm.
way we respond now is just so, so different. You're right. Like as an officer, like their first instinct when they get onto a scene and someone's bleeding is to start, pre-arrival tourniqueting, like helping for when medics arrive, but medics can't come on the scene until the
Right.
threat's eliminated. And I don't know if
Right.
people quite understand that fully. But most times, and I think now they kind of move with them sometimes, depending on the situation. But most times the medics aren't going in until the threat in the scene is secured, which is why officers respond
Yeah.
so quickly now and they move so quickly because the sooner they can get in, the sooner that the medics are going to be coming in right behind them.
Yes, for sure. And I would also say to any dispatchers listening out there to get involved with your schools, with your local big businesses. We do a lot of scenario training with our schools where we go into schools and they allow the dispatchers and the officers to do drills so we can see how they do it, the way that they go in and how they respond and things like that, and it gives you a better understanding so that you can dispatch those calls and know what's going on, and the information to give to people when they're calling in because the approach that they're going to take. I think it's super important to do that. I mean, if you have big businesses in your town, malls, I know malls aren't a big huge thing anymore, but strip malls, Walmarts are always big, things like that,
Mhm.
that there's a potential for so many people to get hurt. Reach out to those places and try to talk to them about coming up with a plan, or even going in there and seeing what their plan is, because it's going to help you so much.
It's so true. And if you're someone who's a supervisor or, have that standing in your department, you should be advocating for dispatch to be heavily involved in these training scenarios because though it is super important for your officers to know how they're going to move, how they're going to respond, how they're going to, shield up, less lethal, all that stuff, how they're going in. Before they get there, dispatchers are handling these calls. We as dispatchers need to know what our stance is, what we're allowed to tell people. Is there a place that we're telling them to move to? Like, how are we responding to all the folks who are calling in as our officers are heading that way? How can we help our officers? What questions should we be asking about this specific location that can help our officers responding? Those are the things that we should be involved in as well when we're doing this tactical scenario training.
Yes, for sure. It's very important. And I mean, we're all dispatchers. We all have the same mind frame. I know everybody has their own individual, characteristics, but for the most part, we're all drawn to this job for a reason. And we all like to know the ins and outs of everything. So, I mean, you can look up, certain things. I know I've looked up, like blueprints or whatever for schools, just to get an idea of how many entrances there are, just in case something, because you never know. You're not able to predict when that's going to happen. It's going to happen. You just don't know when,
Yeah. One of the things, like, we're paid to respond. We're paid to be prepared. And I know that oftentimes, I think citizens want us to be preventative. They want us to prevent the thing from happening. Unfortunately, most of the time, 95% of the time, we're responsive. A thing occurs, you call for help, we send help,
Right.
Sure, like, we should be saturating areas, we should be looking for things, but no victim, no crime, right? So it's just, we can't prevent things from necessarily happening all the time, but when we respond appropriately, we save lives, and it's super important to be prepared for that response.
Yes, for sure. It's very important. And I think that it is adjusted a little bit when I first started, and I started training and getting everything, where I would talk to the newer dispatchers. The biggest call that they were all afraid of is, like, when you ask any group of newbie, we like to call them the newbie dispatchers, but any group of newer dispatchers, their first instinct when you say, what's the call that you're most afraid of? They say suicidal caller. Like, that's this most scared, because it's so uncontrollable. You don't know the outcome. You don't know what's going to go on. But here lately, it's been a shift of, an active shooter situation. That's their biggest fear. And I think rightfully so, because, like you said, that's more of a reality that we live in right now.
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, it's wild how many active shooter calls are out there. I mean, even on the smaller scale, like, I don't know what the actual number is that equals active shooter or equals, that situation, but there's plenty, I'm sure, that don't make it even to these news streams,
Right.
where, 3, 4 people are getting hit in these cities and towns that we've never heard of. And the dispatchers in that area are handling those calls. And even though it never makes it to mainstream media, it's just, that's one thing that my brain, like, really blew up when I started doing this job. Is like, there's so many things that happen that we never hear about, especially in these bigger cities, that I've worked in. I mean, there's so much there's so many victims out there, and it's really unfortunate. But, a good dispatcher can make the difference in those situations, and we can have this lasting impact on someone who doesn't know, or probably will never even know our name. I mean, that's the reality of it.
It is. It really is. I mean, and, I would say that the majority of the people don't get into this job to become somebody. We get in the job to help people. We get in the job to make a difference. And I think it's getting better. It's definitely gotten a lot better. But, I can remember back 5-6 years ago where it was, you did a good job, but, are you going to get told you did a good job? Is anybody going to say anything? As long as everything went smoothly, and you didn't hear anything, that was considered a good job.
Ain't that the truth? It's true. it is one of those things, like, as now we're talking about, like, leadership in our comm centers, it's like, I wanna hear from my supervisors on good
Yeah.
days as well,
Yes.
like, if I'm only hearing about you when I'm being coached, critiqued, or, a harder conversation, it doesn't feel genuine, it doesn't really feel like you're really, pouring into like, me being a better dispatcher. It's just like you're checking a box, you're making sure that I'm doing these things, which I should be, of course, coach me,
Right.
critique me, correct me when I do poorly on a call. But I also want to hear about the good things that I've done. And if the
Right.
only time I hear from you or have a connection with my supervisor is during a coaching, it's like, do you really? It doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like you really care about, my growth as a
Yeah.
dispatcher.
Yeah, for sure. I think a big thing for leadership, it's important to get to know your people. You want to know what your individual dispatchers' passions are, the things that they like. I mean, I have people who, you know, are more focused on accident calls. And then I have people that are more focused on, talking to suicidal callers. And if I hear them dealing with those type of calls, I'll kind of, perk my ear up a little bit. And then when they get done with it, I'll let them know, like, you did a really good job. That was really good, you
Mhm.
know. And then on the other side of that, if there were some things that they're feeling upset about, and I still think they did a good job, I let them know, I think that went, the best possible way. But what do you think you could have done? Like, what are things that you think next time you could have done? And we'll kind of work on that and, progress from there. Because like you said, it is good to have that critique, but you also want to know, hey, somebody's listening and they know that I did a good job. Somebody who in essence is my mentor or whatever is telling me that they think I did awesome. That means I did really good, I mean,
Mhm.
we feed off of that. We thrive off of that.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes a long way, especially when we're talking about, like, our mental health, as
Mhm.
first responders. We've definitely come a long way, in regards to letting first responders have feelings. I think for a long time, um, especially for the infield first responders, it's, sweep under the rug, you're good, like, show up, don't say nothing. And we've really moved away from that. We're starting to move away from that
Yes.
in this industry as a whole, which is amazing. We're talking about mental health, we're talking about, you know, therapy, we're talking about, using our resources and services to help us. Um, and then dispatchers are now entering the scene in a more vocal manner. Hey,
Right.
we're here too. I listen to that person unalive themselves on the phone. Like, I listened to the family member who found them. I, heard the person who was harmed by their partner. All those things are piling up in our backpacks. And now we're saying we need assistance too. we
Yeah.
we're exposed to this trauma as well, and we're being more recognized in that sense. So what do you think has helped change that view on mental health for first responders and dispatchers specifically?
I think it's a long road, I mean, like I said, I come from the old school mentality of you don't let things affect you, you don't let things bother you, but that's not reality. We're all human, we all have emotions, and like you said, there's only a certain amount of suicidal people, there's only a certain amount of deaths and things that you can deal with without it affecting you at all. After a certain amount of time, it's going to affect anybody. um,
Mhm.
I've had conversations with officers who have told me, in retrospect, being the dispatcher, the one who answers that phone call and hearing all of those things is a lot more severe than going out there and seeing it. I feel like they felt like it would affect them more than
Mhm.
being out there and seeing this situation, how it unfolded, and then the potential outcome, because we don't always get those outcomes. We get, the first start of everything, and then we have to hang up the phone and take the next call, and so there's a lot of unfinished stories in our brains that we don't understand, and we
Mhm.
don't always get that ending. I mean, sometimes if you work for a center that works with your officers, you can kind of reach out to the officers and go, hey, was that person okay, or whatever. I don't know what everybody's rules and stuff are. Everybody has different rules. But we never really get a conclusion to every single call that we take because we're busy on the next call, you know. And for the officers, they go out and they're dealing with that traumatic experience and they're putting their life physically on the line. But when they're done with that call, they have that second to kind of debrief, get their self together in their car or whatever they need to do, as opposed to a dispatcher that we're off the phone and 2 seconds later we're on the phone with somebody else's, you know, traumatic incident. So we don't necessarily have that time to process or even think about what's going on.
So
So I
true.
feel like
Like
after a
the
while
never
it
ending
kind of
story.
builds.
Yeah, it's like the never ending story, you know. I think one thing that people can get caught up in, and I mean us in the field as well as out, is comparing the trauma. Like, well, they're in person, so, you know, their trauma is heavier than yours, or, you know, we're answering 40 calls compared to their 2, our trauma is worse than theirs. And
Yeah.
it just is trauma. Like, it's not about
Yes.
weighing whose trauma is worth more. You know,
Right.
it's trauma, period. It's trauma. They have traumatic experiences. We have traumatic experience. We're both willingly opening ourselves up to that because we're choosing this line of work, and we should both receive services to help when those things get too heavy for us.
Yes. So with us, I hope and I pray that it gets the same with everybody. But with us, we've had the unique opportunity to be more involved with like the debriefings. And we have a mental health debrief on major incidents. And then we have a strategical debrief. So we'll talk about, you know, the things that we did, the things that we didn't do, the things that we could do to make it better. But then we have a debriefing with our like mental health liaison. And they talk to us about, you know, the way things process in your mind and how, you know, if you don't know the end of the story, sometimes we make it up and it could end up being more severe than what it actually was. So it has more of an impact on you and things like that. And then we also do them with the officers. So that way we can see, you know, what their side of the story is. Because like you said, it is both traumatic for the person involved and the person who took the phone call. It's in a different way, but it's equal. And so the way that they're seeing things sometimes isn't 100% the way that we're seeing things, but we're both impacted. And I think we've came a long way in that perspective, because I can remember years ago where we didn't have that. We didn't have that at all. You know, it was just, okay, see you tomorrow, you know, and you went home
Yeah.
to yourself thinking, okay, what could I have done? What, you know, all of these things. And I know when I first got into this job, the people that I worked with had been there for a very long time. And so they were kind of used to this. So when I took, you know, some calls that kind of didn't feel right and I didn't really know how they sat with me, and I didn't really get explained the whole mental health thing, it kind of freaked me out a little bit, because I'm like, okay, so I'm thinking about this and then I go to sleep and I wake up and I'm still thinking about this, you know, and then I go to work and I answer the phone, and when I answer the phone, I'm thinking that this call is going to be the same scenario of the one that I dealt with yesterday that really bothered me, and it still bothers me. So now I'm kind of hesitant to answer the phone, but I know I have to answer the phone because it's my job, you know, but I don't want that to happen again. And it just plays over in your mind, and it does impact you. And I think getting out there and talking about it and letting everybody know that, yeah, we all feel the same way. Although we all have our own traumatic calls that we take, they have the potential to affect everybody in a similar fashion. And it's okay to talk about it. You know, it's okay to reach out to fellow dispatchers or, you know, things like that, and have those conversations, because we're all going through the same type of mental situations.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I first started, I took this like weird call. It was like non-emergency call, someone like breaking in. And I remember when I got off work that night, because it was like some weird overtime that I worked. I remember like checking my locks around my house like
Yes.
2 extra times than I normally did, you know,
Yes.
just because I thought of that call. I thought of that situation. It sat with me a little bit, and I was like, let me just go check these doors, make sure, knowing that I
Yeah.
just locked everything up. But I was like, double check, you know.
Oh yeah, for sure. It does. And I mean, and you can kind of think about it like for me, it's kind of impacted the way that I parent a little bit too, because we do deal with a lot of, serious stuff, and it's the worst of the worst type of situations. So
Mhm.
without having that prior knowledge of the way mental health works and things like that, when my kids were a lot younger, I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, every person is trying to steal my kid. Don't talk to my kid. Don't touch my kid. Because that's the type of things that we deal
Mhm.
with, and having to just kind of settle down a little bit and not be overly protective about every single person. Like, no, the guy at Walmart isn't trying to snatch my kid. He's just trying to get something off the shelf beside me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
straight up. And like it just kind of like it kind of points to how our trauma can spill onto our
yes,
family and our partners. Because kids like, why is monkey thinking everybody trying to snatch me up?
yes.
Like those things, like obviously sarcastically about this situation, but
Yes.
like our trauma can really like seep into our relationships. And that is one reason why we really need to empower everyone to, own our stuff and seek services and seek help, talk therapy, like whatever it looks like for you.
Yes.
But our partners are going to feel it maybe before we even notice it. So it's just
Yeah.
nice to do a little cleanup, so
Yeah.
we're not always worried about the guy at Walmart.
Right. It's important because I mean, I think I don't know if it's the same for everybody, but I know for me, like when I first started, I was like a social butterfly. I wanted to go everywhere. I wanted to do everything. I wanted to be around everybody. And then after like year two, I'm sitting in the grocery store and I'm like, there's so many people here. Like, what am I gonna do? Where's the exit? Or even
Yeah.
going to a restaurant. I would be at a restaurant and I'm like, there's a lot of people here. I don't feel comfortable, and just having that understanding of you deal with all of that stuff all the time. So you have to have that reality of like, everybody's not bad. Just because every phone call you take for 12 hours is a situation doesn't mean that everybody in society is horrible, and
Yeah.
it is important to have that understanding, because we do get that super hypersensitive situational awareness to where we're like, oh my God, something's going to happen everywhere I go. Something's going to happen. And unless you can have that mental check with yourself, and like you said, your spouse is going to be at the bar having fun, and you're sitting in the corner going, oh my God, somebody's going to come in. And, that's not a happy way to be with anybody. So it's really important to make sure that you can get that figured out and reach out to resources if you are feeling that way, because I mean, it's natural. Everybody really does go through that time where you're like, okay, I don't know about people right now. So
Yeah.
I mean, you
Straight
have
up.
to.
Mhm. Mhm. It is super important. You do look at the world, if you allow yourself to, you could look at the world as very dark and seedy,
Yes.
and there's no good out there, and you've heard all the worst of the worst, and it's like, yes, that exists. We know it exists, but
Yes.
like as you said, no one calls my job on a good day. So yeah, all
Right.
the calls that I'm gonna receive at work are gonna be terrible. They're gonna be shitty. And
Yes.
you have to remind yourself that you're putting yourself in this line of work to be exposed to those calls, but it's not the majority of the
Right.
world, because it's really easy to look and go, this place is trash.
Right.
But there's so much good out there in the world. And sometimes you got to work a little harder to find it because you're exposed to
Yes.
all the terrible things, but it's there. I promise it's
Yeah.
out there. Well,
Yes.
Rochelle, as we're coming to an end, the last thing that I always ask all my guests is, what advice would you give someone who's considering a career in dispatch?
For me, I would say that if you're considering a career in dispatch, you definitely have to have a passion for wanting to help people. Obviously, that's everybody's first go-to thing. They want to help people, but you also have to have a little bit of a wicked sense of humor. You can't be easily, offended, things like that, because the things that you'll hear in any dispatch center, I know dispatchers out there can tell me that there's things that, that may not be 100% appropriate, but we joke about to kind of get through the day. It's kind of like a coping mechanism, I guess you could say. So go into it with some thick skin, because you're going to definitely need it. And also make sure that you're leaning on your older dispatchers, if you want to call them that, the more experienced dispatchers, because they have so much knowledge and there's so many things, regardless of if you don't feel like they have the skills or not, but they still have that experience that they can give you. If I had the ability to go back, I would have leaned more on those people when I dealt with my first traumatic incident, because they were pros. They knew how to deal with it. They knew how to handle it. And I went back to myself thinking that you're not supposed to feel anything. You're not supposed to have emotions. You're a dispatcher. You're not supposed to think of anything negative, because you're a dispatcher. So I felt really secluded, not knowing that everybody was feeling the exact same thing. I just was too afraid to talk to them because I wanted to be more professional. So don't feel like you can't reach out to people, because there's so many people that can give you that leaning shoulder if you need on, to talk to or whatever.
That's awesome advice. Thank you so much for that, because it's true. Like, you have to, it is this really weird thing in the beginning where you're like, I'm trying to show that I can do the job, but also like people have done it, let them help you. It's definitely a weird,
Yes.
weird middle there. That's amazing advice, Rochelle. Thank you so much for being willing to
Yes.
come on the show today. I had a wonderful time chatting with you, and I learned
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'll be right back with you.
Okay. Bye.
All right, everybody. That was another amazing episode here on Let's Talk Dispatch. Rochelle, thank you so much for being willing to come on and chat with me today. As Rochelle said, amazing advice. Seriously, lean on your people at the beginning of this career. Really find someone who's been doing this for a while in your center that you trust, that you can talk to, because the training is hard. It's long, it's tedious, you feel like you can't do nothing right. And that's just the design. That's how it's supposed to be. If you feel overwhelmed, we've all been there, and you're gonna make it through. You're doing great. Just hang in there. Until next time, everybody, stay raspy. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Let's Talk Dispatch, a Raspy Dispatcher production. If you liked the podcast, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and of course, tell a friend. If you want to be a guest, head to the raspydispatcher.com and check out our additional resources. Until next time, stay raspy, everybody.